One of the stranger side effects of living in the age of social media is the proliferation of images that get shared of inspiring aphorisms set on top of pictures. Anyone who has spent any time on Facebook or Instagram knows what I'm talking about, but in case you don't, I have some examples for you. Hang on. So just a couple of examples of what I am talking about. We have quotes from people like Mahatma Gandhi. We have inspiring messages. This one was interesting to me because this is either a Chinese proverb or something Theodore Roosevelt said. It wasn't clear. And this may be my favorite. Here's a quote from Malcolm X, who famously said, "If not now, when? And if not me, then who?" Or maybe it was this person who said that, or maybe it was this person who said that, or maybe it was Hermione who said that, or Incubus, or as we know, probably it was Rabbi Hillel who said that in our text in Pirkei Avot. I have always struggled with these kinds of aphorisms. Whenever I see them, all I can think about is a poster that hung in my elementary school classroom that looked something like this. Maybe you are a person who loves to share these kinds of things, and I swear I'm not standing in judgment of that, but it just has never worked for me. This week, I had seen a number of these images, all attributed to the same speaker. Perhaps you've seen them too. This week, social media has been full of quotes from the late Congressman and civil rights leader advocate John Lewis, who died on Friday. As people who started to write their tributes and their reminiscences of this American hero, my stream began to fill up with images and quotes of Representative Lewis, images like these. Inspiring for sure, moving. I heard a lot of quotes about good trouble this week. Powerful statements of freedom, optimism, hope, and possibility. Powerful words to be sure, and each of them fits nicely in an Instagram square. But I wondered as I kept swiping through these images, if this week, if they were a fitting tribute or not. Was boiling this man's 80 years of life into a quote about God or good trouble or about optimism helpful or reductive? This man whose life was defined by action, who crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma and was beaten by police, who at age 23 was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington, who served in Congress representing Georgia for more than 3 decades, was his memory enhanced by the proliferation of these quotes, or was it diminished by them? This man who had seen this country change so much, who had led this country through so much, who had come to the end of his life only to be reminded of how much growing we still had to do, were his words enough? This week we start a new book of the Torah, Deuteronomy. The name Deuteronomy comes from the Greek deuteros pneumos, or the second law. The earliest Hebrew references to it call it Mishnah Torah, a restatement of the law. It was given this name because the book is Moses' final speeches, his retelling of the Israelites' story in their 40 years of wandering from Egypt to Sinai to the banks of the Jordan. He restates a number of the laws the Israelites have received along the way, and thus Mishnah Torah, or additional Torah. But Mishnah Torah is not how the book came to be known in Hebrew over the generations. Instead, we call it by one of the first words in the book. Eile ha-devarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael be'ever hayarden. These are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan. And so we call this book Devarim, or words. Of course, the whole Torah is made up of nothing but words. So why is it that it is the name of only this book? Perhaps this is meant to show us Moses' transformation. One of the very first lines that Moses says in the Torah, all the way back in Exodus, when he is addressed by God at the burning bush, is, Lo ish devarim anochi. I am not a man of words. Moses tells God that he is not a good choice for a prophet because he is slow of speech and slow of tongue. How far Moses has come between that day and this one, between not being a man of words to being a prophet whose speech makes up an entire book of the Torah. The story of the Torah is a story of Moses finding his voice, and through him the Israelites find theirs. The stuttering, humble man of Exodus becomes the great orator of Devarim. The name reminds us that these are his words. And how does he use his words? He retells us our story. Devarim begins with a retelling, a stage-by-stage telling of the Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom. It recounts the highs and the lows. Moses knows that he will not cross the Jordan or lead the people into the promised land. He knows that they cannot carry him with them, that he will ascend Mount Nebo and die alone. But he has also come to understand the power of his words. He knows that the words and stories he gives his people are something they can take with them. It's something they can teach their children, and through them his legacy might live on. So Moses spends his final hours retelling the people their own story. In the book Liminal Thinking, creating the change you want by changing the way you think, Dave Gray writes that a belief is a story in your head. The story that Moses teaches the people is more than just an attempt to relay facts. Moses sets out to shape who they are and what they believe. As Steve Silbert writes, Moses tells us a story to give meaning to the facts. He shares a belief and a vision in terms of what has happened, what it all meant, and why it was worth remembering. He connects the past to the present and the present to the future. In doing so, he teaches us to be a people of storytellers. Moses, the man who couldn't string a sentence together, has become the man who will give his people a story that will shape their vision of tomorrow. This is the power of words. They are not mere words. They are not Shakespeare's meaningless words. Rather, they are everything. The Jewish mystics believed that words were the tool that God used to create the universe, that God's words are the fundamental building blocks of the universe, that in the words of the psalmist, God spoke the universe into being. The mystics believe that we have the power to tap into the words that serve as this DNA of the universe, that if we speak the right combination of words, we can reshape reality, that we can speak new possibilities into being. This is the power of words at their best, that they are not just the way I get you to know what I want you to know, but the way in which we imagine new possibilities together. And this is something that John Lewis understood. He knew the power of his words. He knew his words of hope, his words of forgiveness, his words of resistance and justice could shape a new reality. The reason his death was followed by endless social media posts of quotes was that he was abundantly quotable, because he, like Moses, was a man of words. He, like Moses, knew he had to give people a story. John Lewis says, ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes, and each of us in every generation must do our part. He was telling us a story. He was telling us how we fit into a larger story of past, present, and future. He was reminding us that if we all share a story, we can reshape the nature of what it means to be a human being. Let me tell you just one story about the power of John Lewis's words. As I said, Lewis was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington when he was just 23. But the 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial did not hear the speech he had written, because the organizers of the march had seen his draft and there was too much righteous fire in it. They knew the power of his words even then, and they worried that his radical words might be too much. As historian Angus Johnston has noted, a Catholic Archbishop of Washington, D.C., who was scheduled to give the opening invocation, had received an early copy of Lewis's speech the day before the march. He freaked out. Even while the other speeches were going on, Lewis was huddled in a guard station inside the Lincoln Memorial with Dr. King and others negotiating an acceptable version of his speech. In the end, the group negotiated more than a dozen significant changes, each of them moderating its tone and substance. The final type version was completed just moments before Lewis took the stage. Lewis had written that, quote, for the first time in 100 years, this nation is being awakened to the fact that segregation is evil and that it must be destroyed in all its forms. Your presence today proves that you have been aroused to that point of action. They had him take that paragraph out. They had him temper his criticism of the draft of Kennedy's Civil Rights Act, which he wanted to say did not go far enough to protect voting rights, to protect Black Americans from police brutality, that it was too little, too late. They made him say, we support it with great reservation. Lewis had written that, quote, "This nation is still a place of cheap political leaders who build their careers on immoral compromise and ally themselves with open forms of political, economic, and social exploitation." They had him change it to, "By and large, American politics is dominated by politicians who do those things," and then add, "There are exceptions, of course, which we salute." But the biggest change was to a section that began with these excised words. "I want to know which side is the federal government on. The revolution is at hand, and we must free ourselves of the chains of political and economic slavery." You can see why the bishop was worried. So they softened his language and made him refer not to revolution, but to completing the revolution of 1776. They tempered his calls that the Black community had been waiting too long, been too often betrayed, and that they must, quote, "not confine their marching to Washington." I don't want to focus only on what he changed. Lewis's speech was filled with fire, holy fire that was so powerful that the people around it knew that the world was not ready to hear all of it, not prepared for the full force of his words. Lewis spent the rest of his life doling out that fire. He spent the rest of his career living the lessons he learned on that day in Lincoln's shadow, that he had a powerful tool at his disposal, the tool of words, and that when thoughtfully deployed, those words could build up or break down, create or destroy. So maybe I'm okay with Lewis's legacy being, at least in part, Instagrammable quotes. Maybe this is not as trite a salute to him as it initially seemed. Maybe it's even what he would have wanted. Moses stood on the banks of the river and said, "I cannot go with you across the Jordan, but you can take my words with you. You can retell these stories, and with them you can build a future." John Lewis said the same thing. "Here are my words, my enduring gift to you. Let them be light. Let them be hope. Let them be inspiration that you might go forward into freedom." It seems only fitting to give Representative Lewis the last word on this Shabbat. So here are his final words from the March of Washington. Edited though they may be, they are still righteous fire.
We're talking about slow down and stop. We will not stop. All of the forces of Eastland, Barnett, Wallace, and Thurman will not stop this revolution. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. By the forces of our demand, our determination, and our numbers, we shall splinter the segregated South into 1,000 pieces and put them together in the image of God and democracy. We must say, "Wake up, America, wake up," for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.